Welcome to 8 and 9 Figure Mentors, the podcast where we get to know people who've started, run, scaled, and exited 8 and 9 figure businesses. My name's Tim Cameron Kitchen. I'm from Exposure Ninja and Shinobi Capital Group. And in this episode, I'm joined by Scott Lowery. Now, Scott is one of the founders of Buffalo Wild Wings, a chain of buffalo wing restaurants, mainly across the US, but now across the whole world as well. Scott founded the business with his co-founder, Jim, way back in the 80s. And today, Buffalo Wild Wings has grown to revenue of over $3.5 billion. They've got more than 1,200 locations, and actually the business was sold to Arby's for $2.9 billion. We talk about work ethic, and Scott reveals that he was working 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we talk about some of the lessons that Scott and the team learned throughout their years running this incredible business success story. Enjoy. Well, Scott, welcome to 8 and 9 Figure Mentors. It's great to have you on the show.
Well, thanks for having me today. It's a pleasure.
So we're going to jump into some of the key moments from your career and see if we can work out how you think and what makes you tick. I wanted to start by going back to the sort of the start of Buffalo Wild Wings Weck, that first restaurant that you opened, because I think on paper, the sort of the business plan, if I can call it that, and the method that you used to start this first restaurant is very non-traditional and might surprise some people. So perhaps you could take us back to that first restaurant opening and what you and Jimmy sort of had planned when you first started.
Oh, well, that goes back quite a ways. I guess I'll just try to start at the beginning. There was one weekend that Jim wanted me to meet his new girlfriend. And I was living in Oxford, Ohio, which is actually the home of Miami University. And Jim was living in Pittsburgh, and the new girlfriend was living in Columbus, Ohio. So he wanted us to get together in Kent, Ohio, which is a town in between all of those. Kind of sounds like some English country towns, Kent and Oxford. Yeah. But anyways, I picked up his girlfriend in Columbus. I went up to Kent, and he had us stayed in a hotel there, a Holiday Inn, and He was involved with figure skating. That was actually the reason we were there. And he was doing some figure skating judging that weekend. And so he said, here's a 12-pack of beer. You two can drink it while I'm doing the figure skating event. When I come back, we'll go out and get something to eat and go out on the town. So the girlfriend and I went down to the restaurant to have something for lunch that day, and the restaurant was closed for renovation. We just proceeded to drink the 12-pack of beer. And then when Jim came back, he said, let's go get something to eat. And we said, sure, but you got to catch up to us drinking. So we went to town and went to a couple pubs and bars. And by about midnight, we still hadn't gotten anything to eat. And we were coming out of the last bar we were in. And there was this push cart out on the street serving what actually you all call Donners. We call them Euros here. And the meat was exposed to all the elements, and it wasn't very attractive. And he likes, you want one of these? And I was like, no, that doesn't really look good. There's flies buzzing around. And the girlfriend sat there and said, well, they're up and down campus at Ohio State. You know, people eat these all the time. Jim chimed in. Yeah, they're like chicken wings. They're everywhere. I went, oh, time out. Chicken wings are in Pittsburgh, where you're at, called wingdings. They were where we both lived in Buffalo a number of years ago. But here in Ohio, I don't think there is any. He said, well, I'll bet you $5. And we always did these $5 bet between us, and generally never had to pay him. So I knew I was good to take the bet. And so I gave him till 2 o'clock in the morning to find a restaurant that was serving chicken wings. So we went everywhere from midnight until 2 o'clock in the morning. We went to pizzerias, we went to restaurants, and sure enough, I won the bet, but still we had not eaten. By this point in time, the restaurants were all closed, so we still couldn't get anything to eat. He said, well, let's just go to bed, but I got to wake up early tomorrow morning to head back to Pittsburgh, and you need to head back to college. So 4 hours later, he wakes me up and we go to what's called a Waffle House, which is a breakfast place. And we're finally getting our meal. And I guess while we were been driving around that evening, we had talked about these chicken wings extensively and that it might be a good idea to start a business. He goes, you know, we ought to pursue that idea. And I turned to him and said, well, the way my grades are, we ought to do that. And so that's kind of how the idea was invented. And as I said, I was still going to college at the time. So when I returned to college, every class that I was taking business-wise, if I could angle it, I actually did something related to Buffalo Wild Wings. So in my advertising class, I did projects related to doing the marketing for Buffalo Wild Wings. And then I had a very extensive class in business. I can't remember exactly what it was called at the time. It was like a business analysis class. And we had to actually do a 100-page report on a business. And it was supposed to be done in groups of 3. And I joined 2 other people, and I proposed this idea of opening a restaurant. And so they agreed with me to do the project on that. But as we went, they started wanting to put their input. And I went, oh, no, 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 I don't want your input. You just need to follow what I'm doing. The next thing I know, I'm being called into the teacher's office. He goes, your 2 classmates don't want you anymore. So, and I said, well, the truth be told, I really don't want them because they want to change what I'm doing. And I really am planning on doing what I'm doing. So I'm going to just go off and do the report on my own, which was really a great undertaking. At this point in time, well, a lot had happened actually. So I did the report, and I basically got a borderline grade of a D minus C plus. And on hindsight, it was a correct grade by the teacher. He wasn't evaluating my idea; he was evaluating the presentation I had. Mm-hmm. So now I got to step back a little bit, and that was my senior year that I did that project. Well, the previous year, like I said, Jim and I were talking about trying to get the store up and running. And so he had actually found a location at Ohio State and proposed to me that I leave the one college I was at and go to the other college and finish my senior year while opening a restaurant, which I really wasn't wild about because I knew that was going to basically take all my time and everything. But he found this location, so I pursued it with him. He had found a couple other partners to join us, and we had 4 partners in the very beginning. And I'm going to say this is 1981 was when we were doing this. We found a location, but the landlord wasn't going to allow us to have beer. And we really felt to do wings, we needed beer with it. So at the last minute, we tabled the idea and sat there and said, let's not do this. We'll postpone it and come back to it later. And so that's when I went to school and I did the report and everything. During that same time, there was actually some people from Buffalo who came down to the same campus and had the same idea, and they wanted to open up a chicken wing restaurant also. So, and this works out fortunately for us in the long run. So they actually went and opened a restaurant at Ohio State in the fall of 81, the same time that we were going to do it. We would have been competing with each other actually, and so that would not have been good to have 2 restaurants trying to do the same thing with a product that actually nobody's heard of. Maybe it would have been beneficial. But anyways, they had the idea of taking the word chicken and the word wings and marrying them together, and they ended up calling the restaurant that they opened called Ching's Wings. Well, unfortunately, that really doesn't tell you what the product was, especially when nobody even heard of the product. And it sounds a little bit more of an Asian concept. So where they opened in September of 81, they end up closing in January of 82. And that's when I was finishing that paper. And then I finished my classes until May of that year. And then I called up Jim this whole time. Then I sat there and said, okay, when I'm done with school, I'm going to move to Columbus. I'm going to move in with you, and we're going to get this off the ground. Well, he had actually really kind of gotten discouraged that we didn't get it off the year before, and kind of really tabled it and stuff. And we'd even lost one of the partners who was interested in the project. So I moved in with him in May, and we spent May, June, July, August trying to get everything organized. We had actually found that location. Oh, I forgot this part. That Ching's Wings, as I said, it closed. So we then started looking at that as our potential location. So here's a business that had just closed, doing exactly what we wanted to do, and we're thinking about going in there and doing it all over again, which is kind of really not makes sense if you really think about it. You know, why go and do something that just failed in the exact same location? But we had such a tight budget. I was putting in $5,000. Jim was putting in $5,000, and the other 2 partners were going to put in $5,000. But like I said, we lost one, so we only had $15,000 and 3 partners. So that summer of 82, we kept looking for additional funding. We went to banks, we went to family, everybody turned us down. Well, Jim, on the way, probably our last ditch effort, we'd gone up to Buffalo. People had turned us down. We were really disappointed. We're driving back from Buffalo to Columbus, where he was living and I was living with him. And he goes, well, there's this British dance pair champion who I used to work with in Omaha, Nebraska, and he always wanted to open up an English pub. And he said, well, why don't we pitch to him? This guy named is Bernard Spencer. And let's pitch to him that we're going to open up a chicken wing restaurant as a pub. And so we called up Bernie and said, hey, we're going to open up an English pub that serves chicken wings. Would you be interested? So we kind of switched the name around to Buffalo Wild Wings Pub and Grill. We proposed it that way, and he bit. And he sat there and said, "Well, I like it, but I need a proposal from you." And this is where some of these pieces come together. That project that I did while I was in college was the only thing we had. So while we were on the road that day, coming back from Buffalo, we literally cut up my college project and made it into our prospectus that we immediately sent off to him. I asked Jim to even copy my pages at a nickel a page. And he says, "Do you have any money?" And I don't even have a cord. He goes, "Well, then you can't copy your pages. You're out of luck." So I lost my report that way. But in doing so, I gained the opportunity to advance the business because Bernard joined us, and we asked Bernard for a $15,000 loan in addition to his initial money. So we had a whopping $35,000 to start the restaurant. So no, it's not your typical thing. And I did mention this to you. One of the bits of advices I have for people is, when's a good time to start a business? And my unorthodox statement, and this really comes more from Jim, is really anytime. Because it's better to get into a business and make corrections as you go versus the person who sits at home and tries to get everything laid out. And really, this applies even more so to today. But again, get into the business, get started, because by the time you get started at home, everything's going to pass by you. And the way the market changes so quickly these days, you've actually got to be ready to make changes. So actually, it really kind of helped us to always know that we always need to make changes. And the concept still today understands that you can't just rest on your laurels. You've got to keep changing as the world changes. And COVID's a prime example where everybody had to completely refigure out their business and everybody had to stay home. So, I say get started, make changes, and hopefully you're successful.
This is a situation where, like you said, you're selling a product that your target customers maybe haven't even heard of.
Correct.
You're selling it. You've never done this before. You've never opened a restaurant. I'm guessing there wasn't a huge amount of market research done before this either.
No, we actually picked up. This was a funny story. We picked up this one guy, a friend of Jim's one time, and he was a marketing person. He said, "Well, let me go around with you guys." And the whole time he was telling, "This isn't going to work. This won't work." And his market research just killed me. He goes, "Let's just stop and ask this person on the street, have you heard of chicken wings?" "Well, no." He goes, "Right there's your answer. Nobody's heard of it. You can't go forward." And we were like, "Well, we're done with you. Go away."
Right. So not that's interesting research. Is we're done with you. So what gave you the confidence to push onto this path? I know you mentioned that you wanted the license to serve the beer, and that was a really crucial decision, wasn't it? So what gave you the confidence and the certainty to back your instincts like this? Because that is a very non-traditional approach. You're not going to find many Harvard Business Review papers on taking this type of approach to starting a company that's eventually worth billions of dollars.
Well, it's kind of, I'll even say, if you're familiar with Taco Bell, when you're in a market, and we were living in Buffalo, New York, this product was a huge product. Everybody loved it. Taco Bell had tacos, and I can't remember where they were. I want to say Texas or Southern California. But a guy actually saw lines of people going into that restaurant there and didn't understand it. And then he bought that restaurant and then he grew it. So what it is really recognizing an opportunity out there and recognizing that there's a market out there and taking one to the other. And so we knew chicken wings were no place else other than Buffalo, a few places in Pittsburgh, and maybe one or two that had sprinkled to Florida because the people in Buffalo were tired of the cold and went to Florida and tried. But everybody had not had much success at the time. The only one that was starting to have success at the time when we were opening and was our biggest competitor at the time was a place called Hooters. And I don't know if you're familiar with who they are, but I tongue in cheek, I kind of always play a joke on them and saying that we both were serving skin, might happen to be chicken. So because their girls were they were dressed very well. I mean, they had very tight shirts, and there wasn't left much for the imagination. So they were selling something else. They weren't selling chicken wings.
It seems like from the start, you were quite ambitious, whether it's you or Jim or whoever was quite ambitious for BW3. And in my experience, a business like this is it's quite difficult to scale. It's not easy to just go and open more restaurants. And that growth doesn't happen quickly unless there is some serious ambition. So was it the plan from the very beginning to make this a large operation?
Well, I'll give credit to Jim for that. Jim was the ambitious person one in our group. I was I'll say, less than ambitious one. I often joked around that he was the horses ahead of the carriage, and I was the one always pulling back on the reins, trying to still
Mm.
slow down while he was trying to charge ahead. So it actually made a good, marriage between us, and a working relationship. That he didn't go too fast and I didn't go too slow, and we complemented each other on the speed that we went. But no, there was a lot of things that we weren't ready to do. I'll give you another example. I mean, again, we were getting ready to open up this restaurant, and like I said, it was August when we finally got the money and we had the location. So it wasn't September till we got in. And when we got into the location, it was, again, the atmosphere was very poor inside. It was all white walls, fluorescent lighting. The tables were bright orange. And then to add to the complicated situation they had, when you walked in there, the guy actually had what I call a box. He had two panel doors, and he'd open them up, say what you want, and then close them. And then you were in a room that was closed off from the kitchen and the staff, though I think there was only one or two people in their staff. But it was very uninviting location. You felt very, I want to say, naked in this room, with
Mm.
nothing around you. It was just starkness. So when we went in there, we wanted to redesign it. We wanted to tone it down. We brought in tans and chocolate browns to accent, because we were working with the color orange. That was the only color we knew to match up with it. We took the box down, opened up the counter so you could see into the kitchen, so that we could see the customers and everything like that. But we spent our first few weeks painting and rebuilding and everything. And we actually went home the night before, and getting through the permitting process and the inspections. We had all that to do. And again, we weren't familiar with any of this. This was all new to us as we went. So we went home just the night before we were about to open, and we'd been talking about getting our sauces together. We made our medium sauce, but we had made no other sauces. Well, the day of our opening, I turned to Jim at 10:45 when we were about to open the doors at 11, and I'm pouring the sauce into the container we're going to pump it out of and shake the wings in. And I went, oh, we never made the hot or wild. So some of our name sauces, we hadn't even gotten around to R&Ding. And so 15 minutes before we opened the door, I had to go back around the corner, look at what few ingredients we actually had on the shelves, and I made hot. And I gave him a sample and said, hey, what do you think about this? And we went back and forth until we were right and liked and agreed on what temperature it should be. Then I went back around the corner and I quickly made the wild. And I did this all in 15 minutes, and then we opened the door. So again, yeah, lack of preparation, having to do things on the fly. But our namesake sauce I made in 15 minutes before we opened up the door.
That's extraordinary. I mean, on paper, this sounds like absolute chaos. What were those early days like? Was this stressful? Did it go smoothly?
No, no. I mean, again, as I've stated, Jim had. Well, I didn't state it yet, but Jim had no experience in the food industry whatsoever. He was actually a figure skating coach and worked with my father in a business of costumes, renting costumes. The other partner I had sold cars and was a bouncer. We had Bernard Spencer, who was a very good figure skating coach and a British champion of figure dance, but actually, he had a little bit of cooking experience just from his own family. And he did become useful to help us with some guidance on some recipes later on down the road. And myself, I actually was a Zamboni driver at an ice rink, and in between making the ice surface, I would actually go work the snack bar. And so I had a culinary experience of making tuna fish and chicken salad sandwiches and roller dogs. So I had the most experience, and plus I delivered pizzas for a restaurant. And so one of the other things we did do was, of course, delivery right away out of the gate, because that was one thing at least I did know. But no, our sales were extremely low when we opened up. I want to say the first day, I think we had $300, which I thought was great. And I always laugh at something I said to Jim that day. I went, well, this is great. We got $300. So that's 100 to me, 100 to you, and 100 to the other guy. And Bernard wasn't here today, so he doesn't get any of it. And Jim goes, no, we got to keep that money to buy stock, more food down the road. So, but we got off the blocks, and we had low sales. And again, we often hurt ourselves. So to boost sales, one of the partners suggested we do a thing that they did up in Buffalo, which is sell 10-cent wings. So we took Tuesday and said, let's do it 10-cent wing day on Tuesday. And that was great. And actually, it brought us a lot of business. It got crazy as the semester went on. Students started finding this discount where they get 10 wings for $1. And we did it for a limited period of time. And we literally started having students line up outside the door an hour before we'd start the special. And I literally got to a point where we'd have 100 people in line waiting for this special. And I thought it was great because I'm just pulling in the money as fast as I could ring the tell. I was taking the orders. I wasn't serving them out. I was just taking the money, and people would have to wait half an hour for their wings to come up and stuff, but I didn't care, But unfortunately, what we didn't realize was the 10-cent wings we're selling were actually costing us 11 cents. And so the more we sold, the bigger debt we created for ourselves. And then along with some bad weather in January or February that year, we had low customer traffic. And without my knowledge, Jim didn't pay some of the government taxes and got us into another pickle. And so to work our way out of that one, well, actually, I got a little ahead of myself. It was the year after that we got in trouble with the IRS. That spring in '83, Jim had the brilliant idea, and this is where you talk about advancing the company, of already opening a second location. So we're barely figuring out how to make a profit. And we're already opening a second location. And we really made a big mistake with the second location because it did not have beer. It was a turnkey situation. Jim wanted to do it. So we went ahead and did it. He thought we'd had a drive-through. We thought the drive-through would work. But without the beer, we didn't have the traffic we wanted. It was a really bad location with the way the highways were situated, barriers to entry to our business. So that one just, like I said, between that and a bad period of weather, we got ourselves in trouble with the government. And then we had to take 2 years of making payments back to the government before we got ourselves out of that hole. And oddly enough, one of the ways we did that was actually to open a third location, which makes no sense. Again, we do everything the backwards way. If you're in trouble, just expand the business.
Yeah, right, yeah.
But what we did was when we brought in, and each time we opened a restaurant, we kept bringing in a partner. So when we opened this Westerville location, we went from 4 partners to 5. And so to open our 6th location, we brought in a 6th partner. But what we did was we returned to the home that we knew where we were successful back at campus. And the campus was large enough that we could actually put 2 locations at. So we had a North End campus and a South End campus. Both of those stores had a decent profit of it that was helping pay the loss that we were having at that second location. And with that second location, at least when we went into that deal, we made it very short term. We only made the lease that we could get out of after 18 months. So after a year and a half, we were able to turn to the landlord and say, it's not working here. Here's your keys back. Thank you very much for using it, but we're done. And that's when we, were able to pay off the IRS or Ohio State withholding, whatever it was. And then we got ourselves back on good footing. And then we started trying to advance again. And we found some partners down in Cincinnati, Ohio, who wanted to invest. And we then proceeded to get them, would have been now our 3rd/4th location because we closed one. And that one actually came along with a full liquor license, which was a new experience for us now, going from just having beer to having the full liquor and the bar and everything. So that was good at that point. But again, Jim was always wanting to advance the company. And we kept trying to open up small locations with the profit we had each year. We tried to do one more. We went into mall settings. We were trying to reduce our barriers of entry, the cost of entry, going into a mall location where the like a food court. I'm sure you have them over there. So we only had a small space, but we didn't have the beer. So our venture into malls wasn't all that successful. We had to exit those. We kept kind of doing a store here or there. We had stores in Ohio, and this would be like having a store, say, in Birmingham. Our next location was Glasgow. Actually even further away. But I mean, we went all the way to Colorado, which is on the western side of the United States, and we're in the central part. And we opened a store in a ski resort. Why? Because somebody came to us and says, I have money and I'd like to open a restaurant in Steamboat Springs. And we said, sure, no problem. We like to ski. Let's do that. But created all sorts of hardship for us getting product out there and supporting that store. And then this, the food supplier, we only had one location, so we weren't much of interest to there. Didn't really get good pricing. Again, it just stymied our growth, quite
Mm.
honestly. So what this is leading up to is about 1989. We're like going, do we keep going at one store at a time, or do we look at something like franchising?
Mm.
So in '89, we decided we'll take the money that we're going to do for the next store, and we went to a group out of Chicago that helped instruct us how to open up franchising by giving us the legal documents, educating us on the legalities of franchising and how you had to do that, forcing us to do more of an operations manual and stuff like this. Though it was funny when we worked with these people, they sat there and said, and they're used to people coming in having no experience, and not having even a location open. So when I
Mm.
went in there and I wanted to do the operations manual, I went, no, no, what you're presenting is not nearly enough for me. And I went to town and I took basically what their manual was like this and made it like this at the end of
Right.
it. And they were actually probably quite impressed that we had taken our operations to such a level. And I guess I'll go back to, again, I'll give Jim credit. On that day one, when I was pouring those sauces into the container and there was only three of us in the kitchen working, he goes, we need systems. I'm like, systems?
Mm.
There's three of us here. One pump for, one with single order, two pumps for a double order. No, you need to tape that onto the box. You need to make systems so then we train people, but there's nobody here to train. I think that was Jim's figure skating background that was coming through, is that whatever
Right.
we got to do, we got to replicate over and over and over, and I guess maybe it was his lack of food experience and really needed to be taught. And so from day one, we were always planning for the future and thinking
Mm.
about how, this might be something big someday. And we have to start having the manuals, having the procedures and all that. So,
That's super interesting. It's fascinating to hear that the systems thinking was built into some areas of the business, whereas other areas, like for example, what are our criteria for a new store? Whoever's going to throw money at us, or it's maybe a little bit more improvisational. It's really interesting that there were elements that were so clearly systemized, and that by the time you got into that franchise place, that information just poured out of you. It's I guess that gives us an indication of how things are running behind the scenes a bit as well.
well, again, I think that goes to where we did what we needed to as we went along. And that's why,
Yeah.
I say you can sometimes do it as you go, and
Mm.
sometimes you're better to do it as you go.
Mm.
And then I'll step back and say, as I mentioned about that Hooters in the beginning, they were our biggest competitor at the time. And slowly, well, they were like 100 stores and we were eight stores. Slowly over time, we caught up to them and then we surpassed them. And then we've actually outlasted them. I just heard last night they were closing the last Hooters in America or something like that.
Oh wow,
Yeah. So
wow. So
where Buffalo Wild Wings is in the thousands of locations now.
it's incredible. That's
1,100
incredible.
or 1,200, somewhere in that. And we're global. I mean, we're in the Philippines, we're in India, we're in Dubai, Mexico. There's probably other locations internationally that
Mm.
they've gotten to that I can't even, I don't even know about right now.
That's fascinating. So, from what I understand, when you made the decision to franchise, that really brought on a period of rapid growth. And am I right in thinking you were sort of doubling each year from there?
Yeah, well, that was, I'm going to say again, we make so many mistakes, but if you're not making mistakes, you're not pushing the envelope enough, as the old saying goes. And a lot of people are very conservative, and we were less than conservative. So let's just charge into franchising like we charge into opening a restaurant. And we literally had exponential growth.
Mm.
We got the franchising stuff all squared away in 1990. We started selling them. We had one or two purchases, I want to say in 91. Nobody got open in 91. 92 came around and we opened up one location. Great. 93 came around, we opened two locations. Great. 94, we went to four locations. 95, we went to eight. And 96, it was like 16 in 1 year. I mean, it ramped up like this. And
Mm.
literally, I'm going to say the wheels started coming off. And again,
Right.
we started recognizing that we were getting just way too ahead of ourselves.
Mm.
And it wasn't until basically, I'm going to say 97, that we actually pulled back on the reins and slowed down the growth so we could bring in some other people from the industry, because we felt at this point in time, as we wanted to grow, we're going to have to bring in some outsiders
Mm.
And we also had a new idea in the back of our head that we'd like to go public. So
Right,
for,
right.
for more investment capital.
So,
So
because I wanted to ask you, obviously, this sort of rapid growth period, you're probably feeling quite like this thing is sort of running away from you, and it's there's so much that you don't know. But then it also sounds like that had been the sort of underlying feeling maybe throughout. So how did you know when the right time was to bring in additional support? Like when did you and Jim feel most out of your depth?
well, like I said, when we got to, if it was, I mean, we got to about 60 odd locations, and that's where we're really starting to feel the pains of growth. And what I found, it's supplying the management you need. That was really the hardest
Mm,
thing. Was keep in the beginning. It was simple because I was working with the people and I could see who they were and I knew how they worked. And I'm going to, hey, you need to be a manager. You're going to be a general manager. But all of a sudden, you go from needing one or two managers to I need 16 managers. And where am I pulling them all from? And you don't have the resources. And I tell people all the time these days, when you get up to these levels, you literally have to be like a major league team where you have a lot of people on the bench to pull from who are ready to go into the game.
mm,
And we didn't. We did
mm,
not have those people ready, and that's really what slowed us down, was not having the support of keeping able, because if I needed, let's say, 4 managers per restaurant, you just start doing the numbers and turnover. You don't realize, you're going to lose one person, and you might fire another person, and all of a sudden you're losing people that you didn't expect to lose. And
mm,
so even your plan of, I need so many, like if I'm going to open 4 stores and I need 4 managers, that's 16 people I need. But not really. You need 20 people, and
mm,
that's what we didn't really get, and that's what we had to correct, was getting that support of management in there. And then we had to, again, with all those people, it really increased our HR department, really increased our marketing department. So we went through a lot of growth where, I mean, up till that time, I pretty much wore all those hats. I was the
right.
HR department, I was the marketing department, I was the payroll guy, and then I was the chief operations officer. So
Mm,
I'm going all sorts of directions, taking care of all sorts of things. And it's like, no, I got to start spreading this work amongst more people, and then training those people, and then having trust of those people to do what you want them to do. And that
mm.
that really is, I'll say, the biggest hurdle. And I would advise people, that's what you really got to plan for. If there's one thing to plan for when you have that growth, it's talent and people.
Mm.
And that's what can quickly be Achilles heel of a business trying to grow.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think these talent acquisition and hiring needs to be systemized as much as anything else, doesn't it? It's really difficult. So I also wanted to ask you about product market fit, because clearly there was a fantastic product at the core of this business. This business wasn't growing because I know you had some marketing things that you did, but this business wasn't growing because it was a sort of a perfectly oiled machine. This business was growing because you could sell a lot of product. You knew your customers really well. You knew what they liked. How important is that? Because I think a lot of people, when they're trying to grow a business, they actually go straight to the operational side and they sort of see that as the lever rather than just focusing on making the product as good as it can possibly be. What's your take?
Well, it really is our product. I mean, Buffalo Wild Wings sold itself, and that
Mm,
was a beautiful thing. One of my first franchisees, when we were about to open his location, I want to say this was the second franchise location we opened, and he's like, "What's the marketing plan? What are we going to do? You need to have a big spread out there. We need to tell everybody, come to this store." And I turned to him, "No, the marketing plan is all we have to do is open the doors." And he was fuming with me. He's like, "What? That's no plan whatsoever. Opening the doors, there's going to be nobody at the doors." I went, "Trust me, they will show up." But we had a little bit of a, I mean, I'm very fortunate. We had a bit of a cult following. And literally by going to Ohio State and being at a university where people came from all over the state, they had actually been introduced to our product and they became our
mm,
ambassadors. When they went back home and they saw one of our locations, they came in, and they came in with their friends and family and everything like that. And once people came in, they came back. So
mm,
it was actually a very easy marketing thing to do. We didn't have to really oversell them. It was just, once we got them in the door, they kept returning as customers. And that was really, speaking about marketing, one of the biggest things I really tell people is you've got to sell the and keep the people you have. It's more important to bend over backwards for the customers you have than to go and find those new ones. The new ones might come in and they might be permanent customers, but losing that customer you already have is going to cost you more than bringing in that new customer. And I've seen business models where they're constantly bringing in new customers and losing the old ones, and they're never building their base. Where we were able to bring them in and add them to our base and add them to our base and add them to our base. And I just really implore people, you've got to just mind the people who are there. Those are the most important people. It kills me when I go in a store and they might answer a phone call or answer something else. I'm like, your customer is right here in front of you. Don't ignore the person who's come all the way here for somebody who might come here. So take care of the ones that are there in your house, the ones you're serving, and keep them. It's a lot easier to keep a customer than to get a new customer.
How were you able to scale that mindset and those principles as this business became so much larger, and as you had, you have people running franchises, their franchise restaurants? You must have experienced a real sense of maybe a loss of control of some of these key principles that have made you successful up until this point.
No, we really ingrained it into them. I mean, when we were a little bit bad in the beginning, when I had franchisees join into the company, and I'm actually proud of this statement. I actually had a franchisee turn to us and sit there and said, "This is worse than boot camp," and quit. He quit his partners while he was training. And what we did with training, it was like boot camp. I went above and beyond what I needed to do because to me, their success was my success. If I didn't make them successful, I wasn't going to be successful. So when people came in for training, they literally went through 3 weeks of hell and no sleep. I would have them there in the morning. I would have them there till close at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning to be back at 8 o'clock in the morning. But I'll tell you, when I first started the business, I actually my hours were from open to close 7 days a week. And I only took 3 days off the entire first year. I took off Thanksgiving, Christmas Eve, and Christmas Day. And I ended up sleeping through those days entirely because I was so sleep deprived from basically getting up at 8 a.m. and working till 4 a.m. and having 4 hours of personal time each night to get all the sleep I needed, rest, and laundry done. I barely got any sleep the first 2 years. I killed myself in the amount of hours I put in to keep the wages down, to do everything. So when people came in, I kind of said, you need to be trained like I was trained. And I'm going to teach you everything. And I've got to teach you everything in such a short period of time. I've got to take you from an inexperienced person in the kitchen, teach you everything about the kitchen in 1 week. Then the next week, I need to now teach you how to become a manager. Then the next week, I need to teach you how to be an owner. And you really think about that. That's not that much time to teach all those things that I needed to teach. And that's why we literally burned them out and put them through a very rigorous training. The training for Buffalo Wild Wings is nowhere near like that anymore. But in the beginning, we really took these people, really put them to work. You really taught them. And then when we went in and opened their location, we were there at their side. We would actually go and rent a apartment nearby. I would take a team in, and where now franchises might stay a week or two, we were staying a month or two and whatever it took. And if they weren't doing well, we were back in there with the team to support them and really get them. And it probably cost us more money than we needed to spend on them. And it wasn't, again, my plan would have been right out the window. We're overspending and we're not bringing in the money in. But in the long term, I knew it was successful. And I can sit back now and I can look at all these people that we've trained who are now basically millionaires. I mean, I made a lot of millionaires over my day who came in with nothing. These guys who are my franchisees in the beginning, they hawked everything. My first franchisee, the only possession he had left when he opened up the restaurant was his car. He sold everything he had furniture-wise. He didn't have a house. He put every nickel in it. He was living in his grandmother's house, but they got off the ground. They had a very successful business. And then I actually heard recently from somebody, and I didn't know this at the time, but he was doing so well. He had 3 Porsches. I don't even have a Porsche now, but he had 3 Porsches in the beginning, that he shouldn't have had. because I think he spent too much of his money in the beginning. But anyways, you know, these guys got up and running well, and then they turned around and continued to buy more locations.
Mm,
Again, it's taking care of that existing customer. So my customer, instead of just one franchise, became then a group of franchises. They would have
mm.
2, 3 stores. I mean, some of the franchisees that we started back in the day are now have 50 or 60 locations. And I don't think they go into the office anymore.
Hearing about your work ethic, and particularly in the early days, those sort of 140-hour weeks, that is extraordinary. I think very few people are willing to put that level of effort in to get something off the ground. How much of your success and the success of Buffalo Wild Wings do you attribute to just being willing to put the work in and do whatever it takes to make this thing successful?
100% of our success is based on that. Yeah, we
Yeah,
wouldn't be where we were if we didn't put the effort in. They
yeah.
always say you get out of what something is what you put into something. And I
Mm,
always put in 110%. Um, Again, like I say, I'm a little bit of a lazy person, but when I do get involved, I'm going to give it my all,
mm.
and do what has to be done. And if it takes more hours, it takes more hours.
Was Jim the same? Was this a
Oh,
sort of
yeah.
a culture that you had across the company, or was it just top level team that were really
No,
this
no, no.
driven?
That was, and again, it was a great thing. The people in the beginning, my managers, employees who became managers, they all bought into it.
Mm,
I remember one guy in particular, a guy named Larry Podlogger. He was working for me as a manager in a location, and I would come in, and this is when I was actually going home and getting some sleep. I would come in and say, Larry, you're still here from last night? He goes, yeah, I got some things I want to finish up. Larry, go home. I will in a while. Noon, I still see him in the store. Larry, what are you doing? Well, I got to come back at 5 o'clock. Larry, go get some sleep. You know, all my team members, it just became a culture, and
mm,
I didn't ask them to do it. They
mm,
just did it because they wanted to be at the level that basically Jim and I were, and they
mm,
matched that level. They matched the enthusiasm, and they also knew that if they put in the effort, they would get rewarded. And we
mm.
rewarded the people as well as we could. We gave them, well, actually, we, and I'm very proud of this too. I gave benefits that are even unheard of. I mean, we tried to pay them as well as we could, but when I went to health benefits, I actually decided that nobody was going to even have a copay. I paid 100% of their health benefits, and the benefit I went and found was that it paid 100% of everything. That is unheard of policy, and it is unheard of businesses to pay 100% of it. And that's one of the things that I might talk about later. As other people came in, they started changing the culture a little bit. And they said, why are we having a health policy that pays 100%? It can be
Mm,
80/20, and the employee can pick up that 20%. And why don't they co-pay some of the fees for the insurance and stuff like that? And I was like going, well, that was a benefit, and I thought that was a great thing, but they took away those things because it was not the standard business, and they wanted to be closer to the standard business model, where I really believed in excellence and doing it
mm.
as high as possible. They wanted, and this kills me, they just wanted to be above average. And they
Right.
said, that's where we need to be. We can't be average. We can't be excellent. We got to be right there in between. And it killed me to go from excellence to just above average.
Yeah. No, I bet. And I wanted to ask you about the how you experienced giving up some of that control as you took on outside investment later on. But I just wanted to go a little bit deeper on the sort of the work ethic and the culture thing. I don't these days, if you encourage, anything longer than say 35 hours of work in a week, sometimes even 5 hour work week, sorry, 5 day work weeks are a little bit controversial. Lots of people want 4 day work weeks and this type of thing. And there's a lot of focus on, toxic workplace cultures that encourage overwork and things like this. How do you square that with your experience where actually these people could feel really sort of bought in, and this would be a highly stimulating, highly exciting environment if you've got great benefits, you're being taken care of, you really buy into the mission. Yes, you work long hours, but you sort of know what you're getting and you know what you're getting out of that. How do you marry these two things? It feels like that type of culture might be quite difficult to implement today.
Well, no, you can't do it today. I'll be quite honest, you can't do it today. But it goes back to what I said in the beginning: is you've got to be ready to change as society changes,
Mm,
and the world changes, and adapt to whatever is the model and the norms at the time. So no, I could see absolutely right now. There's not a chance I would probably have people doing this. Though I think there is people out there who are still willing to put in extra hours, but I agree they're not going to be doing 80 hours. And 60 is really pushing it, especially if you're only paying them for 40 hours. Now, if you're
Mm,
paying them well enough, they might be happy to go those extra distance. But you do have fatigue, you do have less productivity. So no, you really, you've got to, again, keep changing as the world changes so that you can stay in business, because if you try
mm,
to keep a certain, again, it's like plugging the square peg in the round hole. It's not going to work, and
mm,
you've got to adapt with time, shave off those corners and make that square peg now round to fit the current model and the current way the society is. We yeah no the adaptation that everybody has to do business wise to the changes that are happening in society, that is a great hurdle right now. That is a huge thing for businesses. I mean, I'd almost be fearful a little bit with all the changes that have happened over the last couple of years, and it seems to be accelerating.
mm,
What was maybe even just 5 or 6 years ago is so different today, and that's a short period of time. So
mm,
just keep adjusting as you go, and again, if you learn that model, you'll actually be able to have a longevity in your business. And
mm,
I always, one of my examples many years ago, and I don't know if you're familiar with this chain. It was a Mexican chain called Chi-Chi's.
mm,
They first got into the Mexican market and they dominated the Mexican market. They were the premier player in the Mexican food market. But all of a sudden, other competitors came in, one called Don Pablo's, kind of doing the same thing, but they changed and they developed and they recognized the changes of society and everything. And Chi stayed with their model and would not change, and they just fell to the wayside and disappeared off the face of the earth. And the only thing you find Chi-Chi's now is Chi-Chi's nachos, possibly, or Chi-Chi's salsa in a grocery store. That's the only thing that's left of that whole chain.
There were a few times in the BW3 story where you had that choice, as many businesses do, to either keep growing organically or to take investment, knowing that you'd be diluted and you'd lose some of the control. I think you did that in 1999, taking some VC money, and then in 2003 going public. Is that right? And what were those decisions like, and how do you feel that they changed the business?
Well, they definitely changed the business, but it's something you have to do. When we wanted to go public, one of the things we were told is, and rightfully so, your key people can't be the owners, because when the place goes public, there's a very high chance that the owners are going to retire, then leaving the business in the lurch. So we
Mm,
knew that if we wanted to go public and be successful, we actually had to bring in outside people and show the market that if we were to leave, there is an ongoing situation here and that these people will be able to carry forward. So we made sure, that's where I stepped out of my role as chief operations officer. Jim stepped out of his role as president, and we brought in some outside people. And it's very hard to allow people to come in and put, because they all want to do this, they want to put their thumbprint then on the business, and they
mm,
want to change the business, and again, sometimes it's for the better and sometimes it's for the worse. And you have to step back and bite your tongue. But that's no different than educating a manager how to run a store also. You've got to sometimes allow them to make mistakes and learn from the mistakes. You can maybe so you try to mitigate those mistakes and not let them be so great that they have a disparaging effect on the business. So you just kind of, it's a balance. It really is a balance of saying, I got to watch this crash happen, and then I got to be there to pick up the pieces, and I just got to make sure it's not too bad of a crash. So no, we brought in people and I'll say they made mistakes too, and we had to allow those to happen, and then they got corrected. And yeah, it's a very hard thing to do.
By the time the chain was sold to Arby's for, I think, $2.9 billion, is that right?
You probably have the number. I haven't checked it lately.
Yeah,
It was a huge number. I remember
it-
it was $157 a share that I was
right.
forced to sell my shares, and so it was agreed to. The stockholders voted for, 50% of the shareholders voted for that. So then
Mhm.
100% of the people had to give up their stock.
What was that day like for you? How did that feel?
So I was looking forward to going to public in 97. I was thinking about retiring in 97. I went out for dinner the night before the stock was going to roll out. I celebrated with champagne, and I'll tell everybody, don't go out the night before because it might not happen. I woke up the next morning and I did not see our stock appear on the stock exchange. I called up Jim and I said, "What's happening?" He goes, "Well, we pulled it. We decided not to go out right now." And I went, "What?" And I went, "Okay." And he goes, "Well, maybe in a month." Well, that month ended up being 6 years.
Mm.
So by the time we finally did get around, I was really ready to move on. But fortunately, by 6 more years, the company had grown and the value of the stock had grown. So if I had exited in 97, I would have a lot less money than I would have when I did 2003. So it worked out fine, but it was a lot of long years of sticking around, doing the same thing, watching other people take over the business, taking a side position. I was no longer involved with the development of food. I was no longer in development of stores. It kind of killed me to some extent to have to sit there and just be on the sidelines to some extent, and
Mm.
then let other people do what they were doing. But I knew we
Yeah.
were going to be right in the long run, and I was very happy when we went public, and then I retired.
Yeah. Amazing. Going back to those early days, if the young Scott and Jim stood in front of that first restaurant, not knowing what the future was going to hold, if they could see what became of BW3 and the size of it now, how do you think they'd react?
Well, again, floored by it. I mean, I've always been floored by where we've gotten to. I mean, in the beginning, as I said, Jim was the one who pushed us forward. I would have been happy with maybe 4 locations and enough income to support myself. I have, I just want a roof over my head, some meals, and a little bit of spending money. I'm a very, low budget type of person. I don't need a lot of money, so that's a good thing. But Jim wanted more, and I was like, well, let's just go for it. Let's just keep going for it. And it was always easy. Well, one more step, one more step, one more step. And I
Yeah.
guess we never looked at it like we're going, from day one, we were going like 1,000 stores. I mean, honestly, from day one, we went, maybe our best is maybe we could get to 100 locations and we'll be maxed out and there won't be any
Mm.
more after that.
Right.
It's 1,200 locations globally.
Obviously, the incredible career that you had at BW3. If you could go and relive that career, is there anything that you do differently? Are there any decisions that you'd make in a different way?
Yeah, actually, I hate to say it right now. I would probably not brought in an investor. We brought in because we really didn't need that investor in the 90s. I probably would go back and not have allowed myself to leave the position as chief operations officer. I think hindsight, it might have been better in the long run if Jim and I had actually stayed in our positions, quite
Right.
honestly, and continued to running the company. And I think we get to the exact same position. And th- but we felt we needed to bring in other people, and we did. But I really don't, hindsight, I don't think we needed to. We did have a partner at the time kept saying to us, he goes, "You guys don't need it. You're fine
Mm.
enough. You don't need anybody else." But Jim always kind of was always looking for somebody else to come in and help.
Oh, that's really interesting. So. Was there some sort of self doubt there? Do you think that maybe it was like, oh, these other people will have the expertise and the skills that we don't?
And I don't mean this negatively, but he had a little bit of low self esteem and just
Mm.
really didn't feel like he could do it. He always felt he had to bring in the people to do it.
Mm.
Um, versus myself, I always felt I could just do it myself, and I don't need those other people. So again, we
Mm.
were yin and yang. Um, he won out in this case, and that's the way the history went.
Well, it clearly worked out all right.
Yeah, yeah, oh yes, it did.
I wanted to ask, finally, is there any parting piece of wisdom that you would give listeners who have, seen the success and maybe they're at the start of their journey or maybe they're partway through their journey and, they're having some tough days. They're not sure whether they can keep going. They're not sure whether they need that outside help coming in. What would be your parting words of wisdom for them to encourage them to keep pushing on?
One word: persistence. You got to stay after it, whatever your goal is. I used to sit there and tell myself, if I have to jump over it, if I got to go around it, or I go underneath it, or if I got to go through it, I'm going to get through this obstacle that's ahead of me one way or the other, and I'm going to keep
Mm.
beating my head against it until I get past that obstacle onto the next thing. So it's persistence, persistence, persistence.
Well, thank you, Scott. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your incredible stories, and thank you for being successful. Your success inspires a lot of people. So, yeah, I think in society we don't do enough to celebrate those who are successful and thank them for the inspiration that they bring. So, yeah,
Well,
appreciate you spending your time with us today.
well, thank you very much. Enjoyed it.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on whatever podcast platform you're using. And don't forget to leave us a rating and review. This is a brand new show, so we need all the ratings and reviews that we can get. And if there's anyone in your network that you think might enjoy this, then please do send them along.